السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بكم. I'd like to welcome the class today of our mothers and sisters uh, to the Haidh Masterclass that is scheduled to take place on Mondays and Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. I see a few mothers and sisters have joined the class. The format of the class will be as follows. There will be a presentation uh, of notes on the screen. Uh, there would be no video of the presenter. At the same time, there would be no video of the participants. The participants would not have their video on or their audios on. In terms of accepting or taking queries, you can put your queries in the chat box. And if it is relevant to the presentation and to the slide or slides, I will take the questions and answer them. If it's not answered during the course of the presentation, then I will answer it later, which you can submit through a form to us, inshallah. Now, uh, to give you a brief background of the Haidh Masterclass, uh, approximately 3 years ago, uh, I had done one class over 3 hours, and I found that it had to be more detailed. It had to be explained over a few sessions. And the following year or so, we approached one of the madrasas, Madrasa Islahul Muslimat here in Durban, and we conducted a course over 6 to 8 weeks for the teachers, for the alimas there. We had the session twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1.5 hours each on site. It was restricted just for the teachers. Uh, that carried on for about 8 weeks, and Alhamdulillah, at the end of it, they adjusted and amended their syllabus to suit or to fit the methodology of the Haidh Masterclass being presented to you today. The difference between that class and this class is that class, we had the book in front of us, the Arabic book. We read from the text itself, translated each word, and presented everything on slides to those that attended. So the only difference is that one had the Arabic book and text in front of everyone. This one here, there's no Arabic book and text, it's just the slides, and hence the title Haidh Masterclass Simplified. Otherwise, it's almost the same information that was presented to them that will be presented to you in this class. Now, just to give you the name of the book, is ذخر المتأهلين والنساء في تعريف الأطهار والدماء, translated as provision for the worthy males and females in defining the tuhars and the bloods. That is the name of the original book, which is famously referred to as Birgavi's Manual. So that is the original Arabic text. The sharah and the commentary of it is Manhalul Waridin min Bihar al-Fayd ala Dhukhr al-Muta'ahilin fi Masail al-Hayd, translated as the water plays for passerbyers from its overflowing waters on the book provisions for worthy males and females regarding the Masail and the rules of Haidh. So what we actually studying is both books at once. One is the original text and one is the commentary of the text. Everything has been combined into one in this presentation, in these slides. So you won't have to now go to the Arabic text and search for the finer details. That is a more intensive course where reasons are given, evidence is provided, so on and so forth. All the very detailed information is presented to you. In this class, in this course, it's just the slides that will be presented to you. There'll be no Arabic text presented to you except just for the preface of this class. It's just a short 2 pages. We'll read that and translate it. The rest of it will be from the presentation itself. So if you look at the original book that we studied, it's approximately 190 pages in total. It comprises of a preface, which is 16 pages, an introduction, which is 32 pages, and then six different chapters, each between 10, 20, 30, and 40 pages each. So it's quite lengthy, it's quite detailed and intense, but everything that will be presented to you here today is not something taken out from a random book. It all has been taken out from Birgavi's manual and from Shami's commentary of it. Now, Birgavi was a master and he compiled the original text of the book. However, due to its concise nature, it's very difficult for an average reader to understand the rules regarding Haidh in Birgavi's manual. So Shami came along and Shami did a commentary of it by explaining each point that he put forward and by presenting examples. The most important thing in this class and in this lesson is the examples. If you read the rule, then you may not understand it without looking at an example. And that is the uniqueness of this class. And in fact, the uniqueness of Shami's commentary is where he presents examples for every single thing almost that Birgavi mentions and states. So the English is available of Birgavi's manual, but trust me, you won't understand what is in there without understanding Shami's example. And the pity is, there's no English translation of Shami's commentary on Birgavi's manual. So this is basically like a translation and a presentation of it. It will save you the trouble of going through the detailed text in trying to understand what Shami is saying. So just a brief overview of the book. We will read the preface and then we will jump straight into the slides. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي جعل الرجال على النساء قوامين. All praise is due to Allah who has made men responsible for women وأمرهم بوعظهن والتأديب وتعليم الدين, and has instructed them to advise their women, to educate their women, and to teach them the knowledge of deen. والصلاة والسلام على حبيب رب العالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه هداة الحق وحماة الشرع المتين. And salat and salam on the beloved of Allah and his family and his Sahaba, those that were the true protectors and those that were the true guides of the deen. وبعد, and after praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فقد اتفق الفقهاء على فرضية علم الحال على كل من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر من نسوة ورجال. The fuqaha are unanimous on the compulsion of that knowledge which is applicable to you on all those people who believe in Allah and the last day from men and women. In other words, it is unanimously agreed that it is compulsory for every person, every Muslim, male and female, to study and understand the laws that are applicable to them. And in this case, what is applicable to women? It is the laws and masail of Haidh. So this is a farz upon a woman. فمعرفة الدماء المختصة بالنساء واجبة عليهن وعلى الأزواج والأولياء. Understanding the specific bloods related to women is wajib, compulsory on them, the woman, and upon their husbands and upon their guardians. So, understanding the laws of bloods is not for women only. It's very clear here that it is wajib on men as well, and it is wajib on the guardians as well. Why? Because the wife may not know the laws of bloods, but the husband will have to understand, study it, and then teach his wife and then teach his daughters. So this compulsion is not for women only, it is for husbands as well and for guardians. ولكن هذا كان في زماننا مهجورا بل صار كأن لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. However, in our times, now remember who's speaking here, Birgavi is speaking, and this is over 200 years ago or 300 years ago. He's saying in his time, this has become forgotten. In fact, it is as if it doesn't exist. لا يفرقون بين الحيض والنساء والنفاس والاستحاضة. People do not differentiate between the bloods of haze, menstruation, the bloods of nifas, postnatal bleeding, and dysfunctional bleeding. ولا يميزون بين الصحيحة من الدماء والأطهار والفاسدة. And people do not differentiate between valid bloods and invalid bloods, valid tuhars and invalid tuhars. ترى أمثلهم يكتفي بالمتون المشهورة وأكثر مسائل الدماء فيها مفقودة. You'll see the exemplary amongst them. He's not talking about the general person on the street. He's talking about the great ulama, the great muftis. You will see them sufficing on the general text found in jurisprudence, and many of these masail of bloods, you won't even find them existing in there. In other words, what he is going to present to you today, you'll hardly find it in the common classical books of fiqh. وَالْكُتُبُ الْمَبْسُوطَ لَا يَمْلِكُهَا إِلَّا قَلِيلٌ. And the lengthy collections and huge collections of books, not many possess them except for a few. وَالْمَالِكُونَ أَكْثَرُهُمْ عَنْ مُطَالَعَتِهَا عَاجِزٌ وَعَلِيلٌ. And those that possess them, many of them do not have the ability to study them or are weak in studying them. وأكثر نسخها في باب حيضها تحريف وتبديل. And many of these manuscripts or prints on the topic of haze, you'll find them amended and changed. لعدم اشتغال به مذ دهر طويل. Why? Because people have not studied them for long periods of time. وفي مسائله كثرة وصعوبة واختلافات. And many of its masail you'll find it's difficult, and you will find many differences of opinion. وفي اختيار المشايخ وتصحيحهم أيضا مخالفات. And in regards to the preference of the scholars and their authenticating it, you will also find many differences. So he says, فأردت أن أصنف رسالة حاوية لمسائله اللازمة خاوية عن ذكر خلاف ومباحث غير مهمة. So I intended, who's speaking now? Birgavi is saying that I intended combining a treatise that covers this the relevant laws of the subject without going into mentioning detailed differences of opinion and detailed discussions unnecessarily. In other words, where it is absolutely necessary, he'll mention it, but where it's not necessary, he leaves it out. مقتصرة على الأقوى والأصح والمختار للفتوى مسهلة الضبط والفهم. This is the most important part of the preface. He says that he restricted this to the strongest of views, number one. Number two, the most authentic of views. And number three, the most preferred views for fatwa. Three words that are most important here. Whatever is going to be presented to you in the slide is from Birgavi's manual and is from Shami's commentary on Birgavi's manual. And the views that will be expressed are the strongest, the most authentic, and the most preferred for fatwa. Now, this is important. A mufti that graduates today cannot graduate without studying Shami's works and Shami's books. And this is one of the commentaries of Shami. And muftis today give fatwa from this book. So in other words, you'll have a woman that approaches an alim or a mufti regarding an issue. The alim or mufti will open this book, will look at the view, will understand the context of it, and he will give fatwa directly from this book. In other words, whatever is being presented to you today. So that is the importance of this book. It is the cream of the crop. It is the cream of the crop when it comes to the masail of haze. مسهلة الضبط والفهم, that is easy to grasp and understand. رجاء أن تكون لي ذخرا في العقبة. He says with the hope that it becomes a provision for me in the hereafter. Now he addresses you, the reader or the student of the class, and he says, فَيَا أَيُّهَا النَّاظِرْ إِلَيْهَا بِاللَّهِ الْعَظِيمِ. Oh, the one that is studying this, and he takes the qasam of Allah, the name of Allah. لا تعجل في التخطئة بمجرد رؤيتك فيها المخالفة لظاهر بعض الكتب المشهورة. That do not be quick in attributing errors to me without contrasting it or by finding the information in here contradictory to the information found in the major classical books. فعسى أن تخطئ ابن أخت خالتك فتكون من الذين هلكوا في المهالك. It is possible that you may attribute these errors and become amongst those that are destroyed. فإني قد صرفت شطرا من عمري في ضبط هذا الباب حتى ميزت بفضل الله تعالى بين القشر واللباب. He says that I've spent a large portion of my life in studying the subject, that I have differentiated with the fadl of Allah the pulp and its skin, والسمين والمهزول, the fat from the waste, والصحيح والمعلول, from the authentic and the defective, والجيد والردي, from the good and bad, والضعيف والقوي, from the weak and the strong. In other words, he is sifted through every piece of information on the subject, and he has chosen the best, the most authentic, and he's presenting it to you. ورجحت بأسباب الترجيح المعتبرة ما هو الراجح من الأقوال والاختيارات من الأئمة, and he has given ترجيح and preference using the mechanisms of ترجيح which has been preferred by the أئمة from their views and from their preferences. فارجع البصر كرتين. So he says, go back and study again if you have doubts. وتأمل ما كتبنا مرتين, and revert to what we have written. وعرضه على الفروع والأصول وقواعد المنقول والمعقول, and contrast it to the principles and subsidiary laws and the laws of evidence and the laws of logic. لعلك تطلع على حقيته, so that you may arrive at a right conclusion. وتظهر لك وجوه صحته, and that you understand the background of it, its reasoning. وترجع إلى التصويب من تخطئته, and you avoid attributing errors and rather attribute its correctness to me. And at the end you will say, inshallah, وتقول الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله, that all praise is due to Allah, that He has guided us, and there would have been no one that guided us except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has guided us. So this is the preface outlining the importance of the text, the presentation, and the information that you will have in front of you today. I'd like you to make note of these 3 points. Whatever is mentioned here is aqwa, the strongest of views, asah, the most authentic of views, wal mukhtar, and the most preferred of views for giving fatwa. So sometimes you would see views in other books that would be contrary to this, the views presented here. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is totally incorrect. It may have some substance to it, but remember, it's not if it's contradictory to what we are presenting to you today, it is not the most strongest of view, it is not the most authentic of view, and it is not the most preferred view. Whatever will be presented to you will fulfill those 2 criteria, inshallah. Now we'll jump straight into the slides today. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Haidh definitions. The literal definition of haidh refers and means flow. So the word haidh can be used for a river, it can be used for a stream. The legal definition or the Shari definition is of 2 parts. One is it refers to a state, a legal hindrance to perform worship and ibadah that requires purity. In other words, a woman in the state of haidh, she cannot perform salah, so on and so forth. The second part of it is that haidh refers to physical impurity. Now there are 3 parts to this definition. One is blood that flows from the womb and exits the inner lips, labia minora of the vagina, even if it is legal blood without birth. Now, remember, firstly, haidh is blood. Where does it flow from? It flows from the womb, number 1. Number 2, it must exit the inner lips, labia minora of the farj and the vagina. That is haidh. Now, the third part of it, you won't fully understand it now without looking at the examples coming ahead. Haidh sometimes is literal and sometimes it's legal. In other words, it's where you actually see blood or spotting, And at the times, you don't actually see blood and spotting during those days, but those days are actually counted as haze. So for now, understand the two parts to this definition, which is the most important part, is that it's blood that flows from the womb, number one, and number two, it exits the inner lips, labia minora of the farj. Just a brief guideline. It's not the majora, it's the minora. Just keep that in mind to understand the definitions that will come ahead. So when we look at that definition, that it must come from the womb and it must exit the inner lips, what is excluded from it? The first blood that is excluded from it is Istihaadhah. Why? Because it's not from the womb, number one. The second type of blood that is excluded, these are just some examples to highlight the definition, is that blood from a wound or a nose. Obviously, because it does not come from the womb, it cannot be counted as haze. Blood from the rectum. Here again, blood is not coming out from the womb, therefore, it cannot be haze. Blood seen by a girl under the age of 9. So the fatwa is given on the view that a girl that is 9 years of age and above can only experience menstruation. A woman or girl under that age, if she sees any blood, it will not be counted as haze and menstruation. It will be counted as istihadha. So here again, it doesn't, or it's excluded from the definition. The fifth example is blood seen by a pregnant woman before childbirth. She is pregnant, she hasn't given birth. So the blood that she sees is not from the womb itself, and therefore it is excluded from the definition of menstruation. Or rather, she's pregnant, and because she's pregnant, the blood that flows thereafter cannot be haze. It can either be istihadha, number one, or when she's giving birth, then the blood that follows thereafter would be Nifaas. So simply put, if you look at the definition again, it must flow from the womb and it must exit the inner lips, and you've seen the diagram for that. Now, let's look and understand the difference between literal blood and legal blood. Now, the literal flow of blood, this is one example. A woman spots on day 1, 2, and 3. So look at the chart. Day 1, Sunday. Day 2, Monday. Day 3, Tuesday. She spotted on those days. Now, number one, it could be just one spot on all of those days, or it could be a continuous flow of blood. Women usually ask and try to differentiate between spotting and flowing. Remember, when it comes to the masail of menstruation, etc., whether it is a spot, whether it is a flow on the days of menstruation, etc., it is counted as a spotting or as a flow. It doesn't make a difference. So whether it is a spotting, whether it is a flow, it is one and the same. The laws of menstruation, etc., will apply. So the result is the 3 days are counted as literal days of blood or literal bloods. Why? Because she actually spotted on day 1, 2, and 3. Now, if you look at an example of legal flow of blood, a woman spots on day 1 and 2. She does not spot on day 3 or 4. Then she spots on day 5 and 6. So look at the chart now. Day 1, Sunday, she spotted. Day 2, Monday, she spotted. But now Tuesday and Wednesday, day 3 and day 4, she didn't spot at all. And then she spotted on day 5 on Thursday and day 6 on Friday. So now some women would say, you know what, this first 2 days is counted as a spotting and the last 2 days is counted as a spotting, and therefore it's 4 days. It doesn't work like that. Because it appeared between the days of haze and menstruation, everything from start to end will be counted as days of haze. Now, the first 2 and the last 2 will be counted as literal days and spotting of haze, but the 2 middle will be counted as legal days of blood. In other words, it appeared between the 2, but she didn't actually spot during those 2 days, day 3 and day 4. So here the result is that her spotting is actually 6 days, and not 4 days. So that's the difference between literal flow and legal flow of blood. If there's any questions on this, you can post it in the chat and I'll take the questions and try to answer them now. Okay. So now we've looked at the definition of haze, and we looked at the literal bloods and legal bloods. Now we jump into the topic of the definition of valid bloods of haze, dam sahih. Now you read the preface of Shami, where he says that people don't differentiate between valid bloods and invalid bloods. This is the start of it. So valid bloods are used to establish habits if the bloods are literal or legal, number one. And number two, in the case of haze, it must be 3 days or more or 10 days or less. So a woman has a habit. In other words, she has to have a habit to follow in the current month or the following month to determine when she is going to be performing salah or when she is going to keep fast, etc. So how do you establish a habit? Usually when you approach an alim or a mufti and you present your haze and menstruation case to him, the first thing he's going to ask you is, what is your haze habit? So how is a haze habit established? If the bloods are 3 days or more, that can count. If it is 10 days or less, that can count as a habit, and a habit can be established. There's a question that has come through by a sister. She says that, is the first day you see the blood regarded as day one, or is it 24 hours? The next day at the same time. Example, she saw it at 1 p.m. today. So will it be day one today or tomorrow at 1 p.m.? Now, we are not discussing the times as yet. That example was just to show you which days are counted as literal days of spotting and which days are counted as legal days of spotting. The times as to how you actually count it comes in the next couple of slides. So the actual times we'll discuss later, but the days, the day itself, if someone says, you know what, it was just a spot. So even it was a spot, it is a spot of that day. It's a literal spotting of the blood. It's not legal spotting, or rather it's not counted as legal blood. So the times come in the later slides. For now, the definition of valid bloods, it must be 3 days or less, or 3 days or more, or 10 days or less. So another question the sister asked, can spotting in the first slide also be used interchangeably with flowing? Yes. So you can say spotting or flowing, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. There is no difference whatsoever. Yes, in terms of the timing and the calculation of whether it is certain number of hours, so on and so forth, that comes later. But the fuqaha have not, or rather Shami and Birgavi have not differentiated whatsoever between a spotting and a flowing. Yes, certain where it exceeds a certain number of days, etc., then the rules are different. But in itself, per se, a spot and a flow, there's no difference. Okay. So we look at example one, right? A woman has a haze habit of 6 days. There's another question that's come in. It says, so will haze be from day one of spotting? Yes. So we'll come to the times, but from the time she spotted, if we have to now go back and start counting the days, let's say we now arrive at a conclusion that these are days of haze, etc., we will count from her first spotting. We won't count from anywhere else, because she spotted during those days of haze and menstruation. Right, the question has come again now, should we stop reading Salah immediately, even if you do not spot, but only see blood when wiping? So look, this also is a whole another topic on itself. When do you stop Salah, etc.? But for now, I'll just answer this question. On day one, if you simply spotted and then it was clean, you will clean yourself and continue with salah. You will clean yourself and continue with salah. In other words, you'll make wudu and continue with salah because it's not counted as haze yet. The details of that come in the other slides and in another topic. Okay, so a woman has a haze habit of 6 days. After a tuhar period, she spots for 8 days. Right? So we put the stars there for you to show you her habit. So first 6 days there, that is a habit she spotted, no issue there. But now she spots for 2 more days. She spots on day 7 and day 8. So last month she spotted 6 days. This month she spotted 8 days. So now we're talking about habits and valid bloods. Now the 2 extra days, do we say that her habit has changed from 6 to 8, or we say that she must still go with 6? So we say now it has changed from 6 to 8. Why? Because it fulfills the definition of valid bloods. We said valid bloods are used to establish habits if it is 3 days or more, or if it is 10 days or less. And here it's definitely 3 days or more, and it is also 10 days or less. It fulfills that definition. So therefore, we'll say her habit has now changed from 6 to 8. The result is at the bottom, day 7 and 8 are valid bloods and will be used to establish her new habit as it fulfills the criteria of being 3 days or more or 10 days or less. Therefore, her new habit is 8 days. So this is one example. Another example of where it is not a valid blood and where the habit doesn't change. So a woman has a haze habit of 8 days. After a tuhar period, she spots for 11 days, right? So moving on from the previous example, we said, okay, it's now changed to 8 days. We see the stars there. It's 8 days of habit. Now she still spots on day 9, she still spots on day 10, and then she spots on day 11. So now obviously it goes and it exceeds our criteria and our conditions in that it is not 10 days or less. It's gone more than 10 days. So now because it exceeded 10 days, we'll say, listen, this is not valid blood. This is invalid blood because it's exceeded the time limit of 10 days. So the rule in that case is that because it's invalid blood and it cannot be used to establish a habit, you cannot say, okay, now her habit is 11 days. You cannot even say a habit is 10 days because the blood spotted on that day is invalid blood connected to the blood that comes thereafter on the 11th day. So what does she do? The result, day 11 is invalid blood as it exceeded 10 days. It cannot be used to establish a new habit. Therefore, she will revert to her previous habit of 8 days valid blood. Now, one point I'd like to address. A lot of women understand and believe that if your blood exceeds 10 days and it goes on to day 11, for instance, then if your previous habit was 8 days, it is now 10 days. There is no such thing. Or rather, it is not the most authentic view. It is not the strongest of views and it is not the most preferred of views. The view on which fatwa is given upon is that you will follow valid bloods and valid bloods take preference over invalid blood. So when it's exceeded the 10-day period, you cannot follow that and say, okay, 10 days, must follow 10 days. You will revert to what is valid. And in this case, what is valid? 8 days is valid and no other days. So when it exceeds the 10-day period, you revert to your previous habit. This is to show you that valid bloods are used to establish habits and not invalid bloods. Okay, now the sister asked the question on the times of menstruation, the minutes, the hours, etc. So the minimum period of haze is 72 hours. In brackets, it's put there 3 days and 3 nights. So it's not just 3 days, and it's also not just 3 nights. It is 3 days and 3 nights, a total of 72 hours. So let's look at the first example. A woman spots on Sunday at 8 a.m. Then she spots on Wednesday at 8 a.m. This is equivalent to 72 hours. So you look there on Sunday, 8 o'clock she spotted, and then she spotted on Wednesday at 8 o'clock. She didn't spot in between at all, right? It could be that she spotted, let's say, from Sunday to Wednesday, or it could be that she just spotted on Sunday and Wednesday only, all right? In either case, the rule is the same. it will be counted as a full 72 hours. So now, technically speaking, we'll say Sunday was a literal spotting, Monday was legal blood, Tuesday was legal blood, and Wednesday was literal blood. All right. So it will be counted from the start to the end. This is counted as 72 hours. Now, a common miscalculation is that some people say, no, you count Sunday as one day, Monday is the second day, and Tuesday as the third day. That is incorrect. Why? Because menstruation is counted by hours, is not counted just by the day itself, right? If you say Sunday is one day, Monday is another day, and Tuesday is another day, then you will be falling short by probably 12 hours or even more. So when you count by hours, you have to count by the hour. You don't just count by the day. So Sunday to Wednesday, uh, you look at it, it looks like 4 days, but it's not actually 4 days. It's 3 days and 3 nights, 72 hours in total. So now we say, okay, she's reached the minimum. Now we can actually count it as a haze. Anything less than that will not be counted as haze. So look at example 2. A woman spots on Sunday at 8 a.m. Then she spots on Wednesday at 7:30 a.m. So now it's less than 72 hours. This is 71 hours and 30 minutes. So it's 30 minutes short. So in this case, we say, listen, minimum haze period is 72 hours and it's fallen short of that. So this will not be counted as haze. It will be counted as istihaadhah, right? So just to touch on one of the questions that came earlier, just say she spotted on Sunday and we don't know whether she's going to spot on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. So what must she do thereafter? She must clean herself, make wudu and carry on as normal, right? Because she hasn't reached the threshold of 3 days as yet. So the sisters ask that do we have to include minutes as well if possible? Would that be better, or round off to the closest hour? No, you will count it down to the exact time that you spotted, where you witnessed it. So if you spotted exactly at that time, you obviously will put the minutes, the hours to get the accurate timing. If it's going to fall short by 5 minutes or 10 minutes, then you can't actually count it because it falls short of 72 hours. So that is why you have to keep a record for these things. If you don't have a record, then it's going to be very difficult to track exactly what are your days of haze and what aren't your days of haze. Okay. Now, let's look at the maximum haze period. So we looked at the minimum, which is 3 days and 3 nights, 72 hours. Now we're looking at the maximum period, which is 240 hours, equivalent to 10 days and 10 nights. So again, not just 10 days, and again, not just 10 nights, 240 hours in total. All right. We look at example 1. A woman spots on the 1st of January at 8 a.m. Then she spots on the 11th of January at 8 a.m. This is equivalent to 240 hours. Again, if you look at the calendar, you may say, hey, listen, it's actually 11 days. It's not 10 days. But when you bring it down to the hours, then it's actually 10 days and 10 nights, equivalent to 240 hours. So here we'll say, okay, she's reached the maximum, and this will be counted as haze. The example 2, a woman spots on the 1st of January at 8 a.m. Then she spots on the 11th of January at 8:30 a.m. This is now 240 hours and 30 minutes. So in other words, she's exceeded the time. She's exceeded the time, and therefore we'll say that, of course, in this case, if she has a previous habit, she will then revert to her previous habit, because this will now be counted as invalid blood. It's gone over 10 days. All right. So in summary, 3 days and 3 nights is a minimum haze period, which is 72 hours, and the maximum is 10 days and 10 nights, which is 240 hours. Anything less than 3 days and 3 nights, or anything more than 10 days and 10 nights, will not be counted as haze. It will be counted as istihaadhah. Right. So we've covered the definitions of haze, and we've covered literal legal bloods, and we've also covered the minimum and maximum periods of haze. Now we jump into definitions of Nifaas. Nifaas is postnatal bleeding, right? So literal definition is childbirth, and the legal Shari definition, which is most important to us, is blood that flows from the womb and exits the inner lips, labia minora of the farj of the vagina, even if it is legal blood, after most of the child is delivered and a birth did not occur in the past 6 months. Okay, we've got a question here that come in. If a girl bloods, a if a girl spots or bleeds for the first time, and she bled for 12 days, then what happens? What will be regarded as a habit, or how many days will be regarded as haze? So this slide again also comes later in regards to a beginner woman, a mubtadi'ah. We refer to her as a mubtadi'ah, where she has continuous flow of blood. She has a predetermined habit of 10 days. So in that case, hers is a different case altogether, because she's a beginner and there's no previous habit for her whatsoever. She will go with a predetermined habit of 10 days. And the 2 days thereafter, we'll count it as Istihaadhah, or as part of her tuhar that follows later. Okay, so definition of Nifaas, childbirth, legal definition is almost the same as haze, but with slight differences. So number one, it's from the womb. Number two, it exits the inner lips, labia minora. And number three, which is different from haze, is that it appears after most of the child is delivered. So in other words, a woman is sitting in hospital, she's in labor, and the child, she hasn't given birth, obviously. Sometimes it goes on for 20 hours, sometimes it goes on for 25 hours, so on and so forth. The blood that she experiences at that point is not counted as Nifaas, it is counted as Istihaadhah until 51% of the child or more. In other words, most of the child is delivered. Then at that point, we'll say the blood that flows will be counted as Nifaas. So prior to that, all the laws of Salah, etc., will apply to her. But obviously, she cannot perform Salah in that case, in that state. She'll have to take a record of it. She'll be excused for performing it later due to her circumstance. We'll explain more details of us later on. But simply put, the only difference between this definition and the haze definition is that most of the child must be delivered, and at that point, the blood that flows will be counted as Nifaas. The other thing added to this definition is, for instance, and it's happened, if you look in the news, a woman is pregnant, she gives birth on the 1 month, and then 1 month, or let's say a few days later, a few weeks later, she didn't know she was pregnant with twins, and then she gives birth to another twin. So now, are we going to say, okay, Nifaas starts from the second child and not the first child? That is not the case. It will be counted from the first child. The condition here is that if 6 months didn't pass, then you count from the first child, not from the second child. But if 6 months actually pass, it's a hypothetical scenario that, let's say she was pregnant with twins, she gave birth, 6 months later, she gave birth to the second twin. Then we'll say, okay, no, the first one is counted as one Nifaas, and the second one will be counted as a separate Nifaas, because there's a gap of 6 months. Why 6 months? Because that is the minimum period recognized in the Sharia for a child to be born. Okay, there's a few questions here. If a woman's habit is 7 days, and because of medical reasons sometimes bleeds for 10 or more days, what does she do then? When does she have ghusl? Okay, so she has a habit of 7 days, fine. Now whatever reason, whether it is medical or whether it's hormonal, whatever the case is, if it exceeds 10 days, then the same rule applies. The reason of it being medical or otherwise doesn't make a difference. So because it exceeds 10 days, she will revert to her previous habit. So in this case, her habit is 7 days and now it exceeds 10 days. She will now revert to 10 days, and retrospectively, we'll say that her haze ended on day 7. Her haze ended on day 7. She didn't perform salah on the day 8, 9, 10, etc. Now she has to go back and make qaza for those salahs. Now, she's not going to be counted as sinful because she didn't know at that point in time. Therefore, she'll be excused. But she will have to make qaza of those salahs after day 7. So now the question is, when does she make ghusl? So obviously now when it passes 10 days, she knows, okay, you know what, something's wrong here. She'll make ghusl at that point in time. She couldn't know that, you know what, day 7 would be the last day, or rather the day her haze ends. So now she'll make the ghusl and she'll rectify whatever has to be rectified. Details of this also will come later on. Question here is, the other question is, what happens in the case of miscarriage? So if a woman has a miscarriage, obviously there must be a child. If there's no child, then we can't really count it as nifas. So I'll just give you the rule now. This rule will come later on as well. Is that if a woman miscarries, let's say at 8 weeks, or let's say at 6 weeks, at that point in time, the limbs of the child is not fully formed. The limbs of the child is not fully formed. I discussed this with Dr. Arif Basa, renowned gynecologist. The doctor's view is that at 12 weeks or more is the time when the limbs of the child is actually fully formed. Prior to that, there's no there's no real formation of the limbs, if any, maybe in part, but it's fully formed from 12 weeks or more. So under that period of time, we'll say that if a miscarriage occurs, it's not counted as a child, and therefore the blood that flows thereafter will not be nifas, it will be counted as istihaadhah. Istihaadhah. Yes, let's say at 12 weeks or 13 weeks she miscarries, we'll say that the limbs are formed and now it can be counted as a child. The blood thereafter will be counted as nifas and not istihaadhah. So what you have to determine is the weeks. 12 weeks or more, the blood thereafter will be nifas. Less than that, the blood thereafter that flows from a miscarriage will not be nifas, it will be istihaadhah. Okay, so that's the definition of nifas. Now, let's say a woman has a C-section, all right? Now, let's look at a hypothetical scenario. She has a C-section, right? Obviously, the blood flows from the C-section itself. And in a hypothetical scenario, let's say no blood flows from the farj, from the inner lips of the labia minora. Let's say there's no blood there. We'll say that there is no nifas that applies to her. Now, practically speaking, this doesn't happen. Right? Practically speaking, there is always a flow from the inner lips of the menorah, and that happens. So only at that point, when the blood flows through the farj, we will say at that point, now this is the blood of nifas. But hypothetically speaking, let's say no blood flows through the farj, that will not be counted as nifas. So touching on the twins point again, blood that flows after the first twin is nifas. Blood that flows after the second twin is not counted as a second nifas if 6 months or more have not passed between them. We explained that in the previous slide. Okay, now looking at valid bloods of nifas, this is referred to as dam sahih. Again here, valid bloods are used to establish a nifas habit. Now there's no minimum of nifas, there's a maximum of 40 days. So it can be anywhere between from the point of giving birth till 40 days. So it can be anything. So any blood spotted within that 40-day period will be used to establish a habit of nifas. Now, as there's no minimum period, we're only going to look at the maximum period of nifas. So the maximum period of nifas is 960 hours, which is equivalent to 40 days and 40 nights. Right? A woman spots on the 1st of January at 8 a.m. Then she spots on the 10th of February at 10 a.m. This is 960 hours. All right. So uh, if you look at the entire period here, we've got a full 40-day period. All right. So we'll say that her habit now is 40 days. All right. 960 hours. I think there may be a slight change that has to come to this slide, because if you're counting from the 8th on the 1st, uh, then with working with hours, it should end. It should end on the 11th. And that would give us 960 hours, 40 days, and 40 nights. We'll adjust it accordingly, inshallah. So, point here is again, you count from the first spotting or when the blood flowed after the birth of the child, uh, and up to 40 days and 40 nights. So that's your maximum period. Then we look at the definition of istihaadhah. What does it mean? It's blood that flows due to a ruptured or burst vein that is not due to haze. So istihaadhah doesn't come from the womb. It comes from a place other than the womb due to a ruptured or burst vein. And that doesn't have the same laws of haze, and it doesn't have the same laws of Nifaas. Legally speaking, it's blood that flows from the inner lips of the farj and not from the womb, even if it is legal blood. So sometimes you got days of istihaadhah, so you'll count it from the first to the second day. Sometimes it's just a spotting, and sometimes it's a flow. In either case, from the start to the end, you will count that period of istihaadhah or as istihaadhah. Just to sum up the bloods that we looked at, right? So you've got valid bloods and you've got invalid bloods. Valid bloods are obviously used to establish a habit, and you've got valid bloods in haze and you've got valid bloods in Nifaas. So we said haze, if it's 3 days or more, 10 days or less, it's used to establish a habit. Nifaas, if it's 40 days or less, it's used to establish a habit. And under those, you've sometimes got literal or actual blood, and you've got legal blood. Days that you actually spot and days that you don't actually spot, but it's still counted as days of haze and days of Nifaas. Invalid blood istihaadhah is not used to establish any habits. Now, whilst discussing this subject, we are going to come across three types of women, or rather laws that apply to them. One is the beginner woman, the mubtadi'ah, where she spots for the first time. So who is she? She is a girl who is 9 years of age or more, and she experiences haze or nifas for the first time. She experiences it for the first time. The same question that came now regarding the girl, just three at 10:40 a.m. That question there about where she spots for the first time and it's continuous. Here's the answer to that. In the case of continuous flow of blood, she has a predetermined haze habit of 10 days, a tuhar habit of 20 days, and a nifas habit of 40 days. So for her, it's predetermined because she got nothing to go with. So she has to go with this. And why 10 days? Obviously, because it's the most precautionate, and it's the first time. And tuhar, why? Because in a month, you've got 30 days. So the first 10, that will be usually a woman experiences a haze and a tuhar in a month. That is the standard rule. So the fuqaha have set a habit for her that the first 10 days will be counted as haze, and the rest of the month, which is 20 days, will be counted as tuhar for her. In the case that a woman experiences nifas for the first time, she doesn't have a previous habit, where she has continuous flow of blood, we say, listen, your habit is 40 days because you got no previous habit. Okay. Question: if a woman bled 20 days of nifas and then for one whole week she never bleed and bleeds again for 20 more days, then what's the ruling? So, look, we spoke about literal days and we spoke about legal days. The same rule applies to nifas. Sometimes you're gonna spot on some days, and you're not gonna spot on other days, and then towards the end you're still gonna spot. So let's shove this example and give you a simple example. She spotted on day one, and she didn't spot at all whatsoever throughout the month, and she only spotted on day 40. we'll say that the entire period is counted as one period of Nifaas. Day 1 and day 40, those are counted as literal days of blood, but the days in between, those are counted as legal days of blood, even though she didn't spot on those days. So the entire period will be counted as a Nifas. Now the question arises, she performed Salahs on those days, she performed fast on those days. Obviously, she didn't know, she's not going to be held accountable or rather sinful for that. So the Salahs will fall away because it won't actually count. And let's say it's the fast of Ramadan and she kept fast in between, we'll say that she retrospectively observed those fasts whilst in an impure state. And let's say she kept 10 fasts of Ramadan in that state and condition. Retrospectively, it turned out to be days of Nifas. She will have to make qaza of those fasts later on. So that is why it's important to understand what's literal bloods and what's legal blood. So if you're talking about a mubtadi'ah, we say that she spotted, let's say on day 1 again, and day 40, she had continuous flow of blood over day 40 and went on to day 41. So we know this is a mubtadi'ah. For her, she has a predetermined habit of 40 days. Therefore, she will follow the 40-day example. However, let's say she is not a mubtadi'ah and she has a previous habit. The same rule that we used in Haidh, that valid bloods are used to establish habit. Remember, the valid, in this case, is an invalid blood. Therefore, we cannot follow it. She must go with the predetermined habit of 40. Where she has a habit, let's say 20 days. Her first child, she had a 20-day Nifas period. And now it's exceeding 40 days. We say now she must go back to the 20-day Nifas period. And she must follow that. The other days will not actually be counted as Nifas. Now, many women sometimes don't keep record of it, or don't actually make a mental note of it. And let's say 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, you ask them how many days was your Nifas, they forget, or they find it hard to remember. So it's very important to note down your habit, even in the case of Nifas, because the next time you fall pregnant and you give birth, and it exceeds that 40-day period, you're going to have to follow your previous habit. See, someone put up a hand. Question is, what will be your tuhar after Nifas? So that also is a separate slide, but I'll just answer it here. Tuhar, you must have a minimum of 15 days, whether it is between one haze and another haze, or whether it is between one Nifas and the next haze. You must have a minimum of 15 days. The whole tuhar discussion will come later on, inshallah. So this is the beginner woman. Definition of a habitual woman. This is one that will be used mostly, because a beginner woman, she only experiences the first time. Habitual woman, she experiences all the time. So what's the definition for her? When do we count her as a mu'tada, as a habitual woman? Because certain rules apply to her, they don't necessarily apply to the mubtadi'ah. That's why we have to look at the definition. She's a woman who experiences one valid blood and one valid tuhar, or one of them, right? She experiences one valid blood or one valid tuhar. So let's say you take a mubtadi'ah. She experiences a valid blood and she experiences a valid tuhar. Immediately now, her state or definition changes from mubtadi'ah to mu'tada, and all those laws apply to her. Or she just experiences one for the first time, a valid blood or a valid tuhar. Either or, she experiences one, then we'll say she's a mu'tada, habitual woman, and all those laws apply to her. Let's look at 2 examples. Number 1, she spots for 3 days, then she is clean for 15 days, and then she has continuous flow of blood. So day 1, day 2, day 3, she spots, then she is clean for a full 15 days, and then she has continuous flow of blood. So here, what has happened? We know what is counted as valid blood if it's 3 days or more. So you got 3 days here, that's a valid blood. And then she experiences a tuhar. So now a valid tuhar is actually 15 days with no blood in between those 15 days. So now we'll say, listen, this is counted as a tuhar, a valid tuhar. So result, 3 days is valid haze and 15 days is valid tuhar. She has now become a mu'tada, and all those laws will apply to her. Example number 2, she spots for 5 days, then she is clean for 14 days, and then she has continuous legal flow of blood. So first 5 days, yes, that's a literal flow of blood. That's more than 3 days, we'll say it's a valid blood. But then the tuhar that she experiences is not 15 days, it's actually 14 days. And we said that for a tuhar to actually be valid, it must be 15 days or more. So here it's falling short. So we say, listen, fine, she still experienced one valid blood, even though the tuhar was invalid. She experienced one of them. Therefore, she will now change and be categorized as a mu'tada, as a habitual woman. So the result is the first 5 days is valid haze. The 14 days where no blood occurred becomes invalid now due to the invalid blood spotted on day 15, tuhar fasid. All the details of the tuhar will come later. But just for this example, understand that because it's less than 15 days, it cannot be counted as a valid tuhar. And then the last type of woman that we will be discussing, or rather that will sometimes occur, is a mutahayyira. Mutahayyira, a lost or a confused woman. What does that mean? It means that a woman who has forgotten her habit of haze or nifas, its number of days and where in the month it occurs. This is the most difficult of categories in regards to haze. Now, when we discussed the entire book, we discuss all the chapters except the one chapter which is the mutahayyira. Because in most cases it doesn't apply to women. Most women have or know, more or less the number of days that they spot or where they spot in the month, so it makes it easier. But where a woman doesn't know anything, she knows nothing whatsoever, she is counted as a mutahayyira, and her rules are very, very different to the general rules of a mubtadi'a, a beginner woman, and a mu'tada, a habitual woman. So this brings us to the end of today's class. If there are any further questions, I can answer it now, or if you need to type it out later, you can send it through the form and I will answer it there, inshallah. Question is, does negligence in recording haze make you a confused woman? No, it doesn't necessarily make you a confused or a lost mutahayyira, as long as you know something. You know some days, or you know where in the month it occurs, then there is some way of figuring out a habit for you. That is why when Shami and when Birgavi explains, they say it's wajib and compulsory on a woman. It's not just something you do out of precaution. It is something that is wajib upon you to record. You need to sit down. There's so many apps available that you can use on your phone and record these habits, because it becomes very difficult later on when you got an issue and you come to alim and a mufti and he asks you, hey, listen, what was your habit? You're not going to have any records to present to him whatsoever, and when you don't have records, it's going to make it very difficult to give you an answer and to guide you. Question, will there be a recording of each lesson? Yes, inshallah, there will be a recording of each lesson. Will the slides be shared to the attendees? Yes, those that request it, those that request the recordings, it will be shared with you. The 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 slides. Okay, so we are discussing sharing the recordings and slides with you, but that will definitely happen in the future. Yes, on request, the recordings will be made available. In regards to the slides, we would have to make some edits, and as we go along and as we discuss, and then the final one, inshallah, we hope to share that with you. جزاكم الله خيرا سبحان الله وبحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك